Testing. We're using a microphone today. I'm glad actually we have it because we have such a nice big crowd. Great, thank you. Now I'm going to ask Mary Kay to come up to introduce our speaker today, and we're very grateful to have her here. Hold on.
Good afternoon and welcome. As we know, the whole mission of Sausalito Village is to help the elderly remain independently in their homes. However, as a healthcare advocate, I've become aware of a number of our members who've reached the point where they're not able to care for themselves independently in their homes, and their needs are beyond the scope of what Sausalito Village is able to provide. And in these cases, as a healthcare advocate, I've had to become involved in helping assist those members get connected with the services that can take care of their needs. And as a result of this awareness, Stella Shaw and I started a research project where we began visiting and interviewing various agencies and facilities in Marin. And in our research, we became aware of a publication that listed multiple services available to seniors called Born to Age. And as we read the introduction by its editor, Yvonne Baginski, we became aware of just how knowledgeable she is in all of the services available to seniors, and she's also very aware of the importance in planning. So we decided that she would be an excellent speaker to start our discussion on what is the next stages of life. Yvonne has a great deal of experience dealing with seniors and is very well aware of so many of the services available to them. She has over 30 years of experience in senior advocacy. And she's started the North Coast chapter of the Gray Panthers and also started the first California newsletter for seniors. So she not only knows this information, she lives it. So please join me in welcoming Yvonne Baginski.
It's a real pleasure being here. Sausalito is truly one of my most favorite cities in the whole world. I absolutely love it here, and if I had enough money, I would live here. Absolutely. So I have been thinking about this talk a lot, and I always come into a group and I really don't know who they are or what they're expecting from me or what I'm expecting from them. But I turned 60 this year, and I started the first senior newspaper in California when I was 26 years old, so figure it out. I've been around the block a few times. And one of the things I've done here is in publishing Born to Age for the last 15 years is I made a big change last year. I took out the word senior. It is now a directory for older adults. One of the things that has always struck me has been the separation, the delineation, the us and them aspect of that word. And last year, the London Times came out with journalistic phrases not to use anymore in writing about people. Those words were elderly, senile, senior, and they had a whole list of the words that we commonly use because they are words that delineate one group of people from another in a very negative way. It's adults and children. We don't delineate the different age groups in adulthood. And a lot of times people will say to me, well, what is a senior? Is it 50, 55, 45, 90? Those are different times in life. But it's all still adulthood. So I took the word out and made it older adults. And I said, if there's one thing we can start doing is changing our language, changing the way we see getting older, because it is here to stay. This is not a baby boomer blip. I have children who are going to live this long. They're going to have children who are going to live this long. We're here to stay. And what I'm saying to everybody is get used to it. There's going to be a lot of people with gray and white hair hanging around for a very, very long time. So I'm putting together this directory for older adults. I started the process only because so many people don't do any planning at all for getting older. You know, when I had my children and I got pregnant, they gave me all kinds of books and magazines and checklists, and they threw baby showers for me, and they did all kinds of stuff. Well, you know, you don't see a lot of people throwing showers for getting older, do you? You don't see those walkers coming out and saying, hey, look at this scooter. This is a great brand, and you can put your coffee here. So you don't see that. We don't celebrate that as a phase of life. We celebrate it as something we want to avoid. And what I always tell the people who advertise with me and the people who are in that directory, no one's looking forward to the day when they need home care. You're not selling Pepsi here. No one's looking forward to the day when they have to go into the nursing home or when they develop a condition that changes their life forever. This is not a happy phase. So I tell people, you know, before you get to that phase, think about how you want to live. What will be the quality of your life? We will all outlive our ability to drive by 7 years. That's statistically a valid point. So what do you know about the transportation system? What are your plans? Where do you live? I went out the other day and visited a woman who lives out in Pope Valley. Any of you know where Pope Valley is? It's way the hell out there. It is so far out there. It took me an hour and a half of driving windy roads almost to Lake County to find her. And she was on top of a beautiful home with a beautiful view. And she said to me, what services are available to me? I said, you got it. Me coming out here once. She's 66 years old, and she's developed diabetes, and she lost her eyesight and had a stroke and went down the stairs. And what do? They send you home. And what do you do when you get home? You figure, how are you going to manage? And I said, well, you moved all the way out here. What were you thinking? What were you thinking? You think the bus is going to come? So now we're moving her back into Napa, but she's never made plans. She's never thought about what would happen if something was to happen. Now, I give this a lot of thought. I'm single. I have 3 adult children. There is no white horse with a knight on it in my future. And I'm looking about how do I plan on living the rest of my life. My mother is 83 years old. My mother also never made any plans. I was publishing that directory, and she would comment every year, oh, you look so nice in this picture. I'm going to cut it out and keep it here. She wouldn't even read the articles because she was never going to get to that place. In her mind, she was going to do crossword puzzles and function just as she's doing now the rest of her life. Nothing was going to happen to her, and she was going to drop dead at night. The angels were going to come and take her to heaven. That was her life plan. That was her life plan. So we would beg her. We would plead with her. We would ask her to please sit down. I would bring her health care directives. I would bring her everything. And you know what she would say to me? You just want my money. No, Mom, I want you to tell us, because when we get to this place, it's going to be really hard. It's going to be a real burden for us, because we live in California and you live in Michigan. And what are we going to do? How many of you have children who live far away? And what are you going to do when the time comes, and how do you know when it's the time? So my mother, who took care of her mother in her home for 7 years with 3 caregivers, said to me, I am not going to need any of you to take care of me. I'm going to be just fine. My mom came out. My daughter graduated from college. My mom came out for the graduation. She flew out. My mom spoke 7 languages. She has a PhD. She writes poetry. She's very, very active in her community. She belongs to the Jewish Community Center. She works on all these publications. She came out to visit me, and she said to me, when I go back home to 6447 Norborn, and I said, you don't live at 6447 Norborn. You live someplace else. And she insisted she lived at 6447 Norborn, which was our original home 50 years ago. That's when I knew. I knew things were starting to happen. And so I went back and I told the family, and the family said to me, you know what, you work too much with old people. You think everybody's got this stuff. And they refused to listen to me. And that was 7 years ago. My mom came to California finally on a Delta jetliner in January. She wanted to get out over Oklahoma. She thought she had gone far enough. She has advanced Alzheimer's. She lives up in Eureka with my sister, and she doesn't know who I am. And she thinks my daughter is me, a much nicer me. She keeps saying that to my daughter. You're much nicer now than you ever were. So, that's my story. What happens is people start losing their memory and they don't know it. And one of the first things that'll happen when people start losing their memory is they'll tell you they're fine and they'll start getting angry and upset. So, I also have a father. My father is 88 now, and he lives in Tucson, Arizona. And he can't travel to visit us anymore either. And he's a Holocaust survivor, and he has had episodes of PTSD throughout his life. What happens later in life with people who have untreated PTSD and depression? Does anybody here know? You were going to say something? They get a form of delirium and depression as well, and they get dementia. And so my dad has what they call a delirium that happens sporadically. So he'll think something totally crazy for a short period of time, and then he'll be fine. And he has these periods that have been increasing. And we can't go get him because he's still in capacity. He still can take care of himself. And he doesn't want to come to California. And he believes he's going to live another 50 years. He doesn't think he's going to die anytime soon, and he doesn't think there's any planning to have to be done. So when I say to him, Dad, we got to sit down and talk about what's going to happen next, my dad says, all you want is my money. I'm going to be very rich one day. Very, very rich. So I have sat down and I said, rather than pushing my parents who aren't going to budge, what can I do to make my life different? So I have sat down with my family and I've talked about what would happen. Because it's not just about getting older. Anybody in this room can have an accident, can develop a disease, can have a stroke. Anything can happen at any time. What would you like? How would you like to live? That's really the question. The first thing I did was I sat down and I filled out an advance directive. Everybody here have an advance directive? Okay. Not everybody here has an advance directive. Everybody over age 18 in California should have an advance directive. Because the truth is, even though my son was 26 years old, when he was hit by a car on a bicycle and taken to the hospital emergency room unconscious, they could not contact me because he's an adult. And there was nothing in the paperwork to tell them to contact me. Luckily, the EMT, the ambulance driver who picked him up, was his best friend from high school and called me up and said, come down to the emergency room, Alex is on the table. So I show up, and he's already conscious, but his neck's all braced and everything, and he looks over and he goes, point taken, Mom. Point taken. He got it. I was going to come in there and say, you may not want my money, but I want you my advance directive. So getting an advance directive is really important. And people get very confused about the advance directive because they don't know how to choose an agent. And what I tell people when they complete an advance directive is to make sure your agent is going to follow your directions, period. And make sure that you're going to not outlive your agent. Because I have people who choose an agent who lives in North Dakota who's their 94-year-old sister. And I say, think about who you're choosing as an agent and have the conversation with them about if they were ever called in to have to make a choice, what would you want them to do? People will write down their health care directive, because how many of you have a trust and your attorney put it with all the papers, right? So where's your papers? Oh, they're in my closet or they're in my safety deposit box. No, your health directive needs to be with your doctor, with you, the emergency room, and each of your agents need to have a copy of that. How many of you have a POLST, a P-O-L-S-T, Physician's Order for Life-Sustaining Treatment? It's a pink form that you would put on the refrigerator. A POLST form is a physician's order. It's a legal document, and you would find it necessary if it would be of no surprise to anybody if you died within a year. So people with life-threatening illnesses, long-term chronic conditions, people who are very old will often be asked by their doctor to prepare a POLST. Don't wait for your doctor to ask you. He won't. She won't. Because they're afraid that if you do it, that you're going to run because you're telling them they only have a year to live. If you get a post, what it does is it gives instructions to the ambulance not to do CPR or to do CPR. But what it does is it tells the ambulance, if I have died a natural death, let me be. Do not come in here and start with the CPR and start with the paddles and everything. Because even if you've been dead for 30 minutes and they come in, they're going to start working on you because that's what they're mandated to do. So if you have a post and you put it up and it says, do not do CPR, this is a DNR, or it says start doing start doing a CPR and take me to the hospital, they will do full code on you and take you to the hospital. So that's just your medical stuff. And why does it matter? Why does it matter so much? Because once you get into the medical system, you're in a system, and people start following protocols. This is a true story. It happened 2 weeks ago. A family called me up because their brother, who was 62 years old, had completed an advance directive, but he didn't give it to anybody but his mother, who lived in North Carolina. Okay? He went into a coma. He was drinking quite heavily. He went into a coma, and he had a stroke. They brought him to the hospital. His advance directive said, do not put me on machines under any circumstances. No advance directive at the hospital. His mother had it in North Carolina, so what did they do? Put him on machines. They put him on machines. Mom comes flying in the hospital with the advance directive and says, take him off the machines. Well, he's alive now. They can't do it. They said we have to wait it out. So here he is. He gets taken off the machines. He's breathing on his own, and he is shocked and mortified. And so he passes the nurse a note and says, just let me die. And guess what the doctor does? 5150s him, puts him on restraints, and put him under psychiatric watch. Potential suicide. True story. True story. Now he has brain damage. Now he can never recover and go back to normal life. So they call me up and they say, do you have a psychiatric facility with someone with permanent brain damage from going into a coma can go to? And now he has to go on Medi-Cal, where he's going to live the rest of his life in a nursing home, somewhere in the state of California, because we couldn't find a place to put him. True story. So it's really important, because people don't think it's going to happen. It does. These are the calls I get. And so I say, make sure that people know what you want. Make sure that your doctor knows what you want. And here's the third most important document you can have, and that's the power of attorney for finances. How many of you have made arrangements for someone to take over your finances if you're not able? Okay. What that document says is, someone can take over my checking account, my real estate, my home, whatever. And then there's a little caveat. When can they take it over? Some people say power of attorney immediately, as of today. If they want, they can take over. Or some people say, I need 2 doctors to signify that I don't have incapacity. I need 2 doctors. Now, how many of you have 2 doctors who would do that? One of the problems we're seeing is that the doctors are very reluctant to deem somebody incapacitated. Kaiser was recently sued, and somebody else was recently sued. So I hear there's a real pullback on deeming incapacity. And if you're a Kaiser patient, you know that one doctor might say, okay, this person has incapacity, and the second doctor might say, you know what, I haven't seen them enough, or I don't know them well enough. So getting incapacity declarations so power of attorney can kick in can be very, very difficult. So what I always recommend is find somebody you know and trust, turn over power of attorney, and then let them decide when it's time to do that.
Do you want us to hold questions?
Yes, hold questions until, because I'm doing this, and I'm going to start with the planning, and then I'm going to go to... I also have had many people say, well, what I'm going to do is just put my son or daughter on all my bank accounts and put them on the deed of my trust and do that sort of thing, which is another way of doing it. However, the caveat for that is, if I get sued and I'm on my mom's checking account, they can go after my mom's money as well, because that's also part of my checking account. See what I'm saying? I only read that in Len Tillum. I don't know if it's really true, But Len Tillum always says that. But he's an attorney, and I always go, those attorneys have all kinds of reasons for us not to do stuff. But the truth is that if you have financial power of attorney, if you have the form that's on the computer, because you can download the form off the computer, Wells Fargo, Chase, all your banks have their own power of attorney. So not only do you have to fill out one general power of attorney, but you have to go to your bank, your stockbroker, and all that, and get all those individual power of attorneys taken care of as well. Okay? How many of you are married and have the other person as the trustee on the trust? Okay, so you're both about the same age, and you've kept the other one on the trustee. As you start getting older, I would recommend that you make one of the trustees someone who's a little younger. Because what will happen is the husband and the wife will be the trustee. The wife develops dementia, the husband has a stroke, then who's the trustee? So we run into all kinds of problems with trusts and having the wrong trustee designated. In many cases, we have the caregiver die before the person who has the chronic condition die. Then we get really stuck. Yeah, so we've been in a lot of really sticky situations. And you know what? People stick by the rules. Sometimes it may take 2 or 3 years to settle a problem because everybody's sticking by those rules. It's a real runaround. Okay, I'm open to some questions on those 3 things. If you have a question, yeah.
My mother was in huge resistance to being termed incapacitated, and still, even though now she's in a memory care unit locked down, she would still say, no, I'm not doing that.
Mm-hmm.
What do you suggest for that if that's true?
By the time you're in that situation, it's too late to do anything. So you have to file for a conservatorship through the court.
I mean, what do you say to an old person who says, I don't want to have that form exist? Because that was my mother's position before she became certified.
Right. You don't say anything. There's no fight. The fight's over. It's kind of like the train's left the station, and they're going to keep saying whatever they're going to say. Yeah. And so what ends up happening is you file papers for a conservatorship, and then you go forth and you have documentation of the person's incapacity. They're in a memory care unit. Here's the documentation, and you have to have the court give you conservatorship. It's an extra step. My sister took my mother to her attorney. My mother was spitting mad. I mean, spitting mad. And how dare you take me here? How dare you? But she signed the papers. She signed the papers. Her attorney convinced her to sign the papers. But she was spitting mad, which is part of the disease. People don't realize that part of the disease is that anger, that irritability, that lashing out, the screaming, the abuse is part of the disease as well.
Are all emergency crews required to
Yes. Yes.
on
Put it on your refrigerator with magnets. All emergency crews will look on the refrigerator. Or I had some people put it in right when you walk in the door. You can't miss it. And then I had one man say, I don't want to look at that form every time I open the door for milk. The pulse.
In Sausalito, what we have is the Are You OK program through the police department. And what this is a form that you fill out. You can pick it up at the police department. Stacy Gregory has them, or Dawn at the desk. And it's one sheet, and it's information about emergency contacts. And this is particularly of importance if the police come for a well check call because a neighbor is worrying about you, or in case of an emergency, an earthquake or something, so that we know where all of the people who are most vulnerable in the community live. Does that make sense? Oh, just as I said, in Sausalito, I can only speak in Sausalito, and that's only in Sausalito that we have this Are You OK program. We are doing it through our police department because they're involved in it. Sybil, you have something to say on it?
I think that Are You OK program has like a folder that you can put on your refrigerator, so you can put your pulse in the folder.
Well, it's a vial. We're using the vials. We're using the vials of life.
So that you don't have to look at it every time, but
Yeah.
there's a thing
There's a sticker that you can put on your refrigerator, and then the vial of life that'll go into your freezer, which looks like a big medicine, prescription bottle, and that's where you can put your information. Sharon?
So, are you saying that if you have the Are You OK thing, you don't need the pulse?
No, we are not saying that. All it is the Are You OK is only for the police to know where you live, where your key would be hidden, who your emergency contacts are, so if they go there for a well check. And it's also a way they give you the vial of life, and that's where you would put all of your important information, is in that vial of life that they will give you when they give you the Are You OK form. That makes sense?
I just want to say Kaiser, if you belong to Kaiser, they have a list. You bring all your papers into there, and they put it all on record, so they can get everything right there.
Right. Except the EMTs don't know that. The EMTs, the post form is legally, it's a doctor-signed form, but the EMTs are required to follow this. I was responsible for the post rollout in Napa County, and it was a very difficult process because so many people misunderstood that this is a legal document, and that's why a doctor has to sign it. Not just you, but a doctor. Yeah.
There should be, is there any tendency or incentive to have this a more portable paper to carry in your wallet or something? I mean, things could happen at home or wherever you have this on your fridge. You're moving around everywhere.
Right. Some states have some wallet cards. We don't. But you're right. The purpose of the post form is, in event of an emergency, what do the EMTs do? And the question is, should I have a wallet card? Should I have something else for them? And we don't have that in California right now. No, we don't, but other states do. But it's the bright pink color that everybody has. Okay. So those are the really important documents. Okay. And that's kind of making the plan. You would need to file for a conservatorship through the court system. And how you file for a conservatorship is you can go down to the legal library here, and you can actually get the paperwork from the legal library, and then you can get some supporting documents, and you file, and you wait 30 days to court, and they have to serve your mom, and your mom can decide whether or not she wants herself with an attorney.
So this is in case somebody older or whoever is no longer able to take care of themselves.
Correct.
Okay,
Correct.
thank you.
Correct. Or somebody you really just don't like. I will say this. I have the county, you have a county guardian here who can also conserve people. And I will say that sometimes it is very difficult to get somebody conserved. It is very, very difficult. There's an investigation. It has to be proved that this person really needs conserved because they are so self-neglectful. But it cannot be a lifestyle. They've always lived this way. It's like walking into somebody's house and there's a dead cat on the floor and they pick it up and they throw it. And I go, did they always live this way, or is this part of their dementia? Okay. I have a woman who is not walked since January. She is laying on a couch. She has not walked. She has severe diabetes. She has chosen not to walk. Her muscles have debilitated. She urinates in glass jars, puts them in a kitty litter container. She defecates in plastic bags. I asked for her to be conserved because she's not able to cash her SSI check. She's not able to feed herself. And the doctor refused to sign the incapacity forms. He said this is a lifestyle choice, not a question of dementia.
How can we know when it's ready? I mean, if you don't know what's going on and someone else has to guess, how do we figure out that we're ready?
How many of you have friends who you know have dementia but who would never, ever admit it? Right? You know there's something wrong. You know there's something wrong, and when you ask them, they tell you they're just fine or they're not forgetting anything. Okay? That is the biggest dilemma we have right now, is when something becomes what they call mild cognitive impairment, of which about half of you in this room are going to get, if you don't already have it. It's very difficult to measure mild cognitive impairment because doctors don't have a universal scale. I've seen doctors ask questions like, well, do you know what date it is? Do you know what day it is? Do you know your kids' names? They're fine. There's nothing wrong with them. And I go, well, wait a second. I don't know what date it is. Must be I'm not fine. Because the questions they're asking are irrelevant. Those aren't the questions that they need to be asking. So there is testing available. And one of the testing that they have that's very good is UC Davis has a memory testing center in Walnut Creek now. And you can go there under your Medicare benefit. It's 3 days. They do x-rays. They do the whole thing. And they can tell you how much memory loss you have and what's it attributed to.
And also UCSF.
Correct.
Has a memory and aging center.
Correct. And Kaiser now opened one up as well. So you can go to these places and get tested just to see how much. And, you know, part of the concern is when my mother started losing her memory, she, if you had a regular conversation with her, you would never know it. If you started being with her throughout the day, you started picking up on it. It would take being with her all day. My mom spoke 7 languages. When I would ask her to write something, she stopped writing in English. She was an English teacher. She would write in Russian. She didn't realize that she was writing in Russian. So, why? Do you read Russian?
No, but you could have told her I wanted things you had written in English, but I never.
She didn't know she was writing in Russian. No, she didn't know. And my mother also spoke fluent Latin, so guess what her language right now is? None of us can understand her. Okay.
This is a horrible statement, but I don't have family, and I live alone. Now, assuming I get this memory, I don't already have it, but
Of course not.
I recently put a friend of mine in a nursing home to take care of him because I had the forethought to make him get a power of attorney, et cetera. So it was an easy transition for me to take over. But that friend, my best friend, is in a nursing home. And now, okay, I'm alone, and I'm walking around the street, and I'm impaired. What is going to happen to me?
I think some of the statistics I hear is 80% of people with cognitive impairment are living at home alone. Is that what you're hearing? I'm hearing that many people with cognitive impairment can manage in a routine, and it depends on who sees you and who's taking care of you. I cannot tell you how many times we walk into homes and people have been severely mentally impaired for a very, very long time before someone called Adult Protective Services.
So my neighbor would call Adult Protective
Correct.
Services. What would happen next?
Well, they would come in and they would make an assessment and make some suggestions for you, of which all of you would resist. You would resist everything. And then they would start making plans if they could see that you were in danger to yourself or that you were neglecting yourself. They would start a protocol for conservatorship, which they would then have to get through your doctor. Adult Protective Services, the social workers, the public guardian. If you don't appoint somebody, say you have a best friend, you say, you know, if something happens to me, I want this person to take care of me. If you don't have that in place, the public guardian comes in and takes over. They would prefer that you have a family member or a friend in place. They do not want to come in and take over. But when people reach a point where they're simply not functioning and not able to talk or take care of themselves, the public guardian will file for a conservatorship. There is an investigation, and then they will take over the care, which usually means they will take you from your home and place you somewhere. That's what it usually means. You're probably going to a boarding care home in Vallejo. Okay, go ahead.
If you do live alone, or for whatever reason, you know, your children are far away, or you don't want to live with your, and not everybody wants to be grandma in the back room. And you know the statistics that you sort of knew, but that you just laid out for us, that no matter what you feel like today, something's going to happen. How do you feel about the booming industry of continuing care or independent living, where somebody is watching you, in addition to a family member or
Okay. This will be a good segue for us into part 2, which is what kind of life do you want to lead? What kind of a person are you? What kind of plans do you want to make? I know many people who are saying, I don't want to go into a community to live. I want to stay living in my own community. How can I do this? What kind of arrangements can I make now? What kind of programs can I salvage? Marin Villages is one of those programs that's saying we're going to keep you going at home for as long as possible. Another program that's looking at doing that is the shared housing program. We're going to help you share your home with somebody that can come in and help take care of you. What kind of life do you want to live? You know, I have people who say to me, you know, I know one day I'm going to go live at Aegis, this particular Aegis. There's different levels of care. There's independent living, which is what all of you, I presume, are doing now, where you can go live in an apartment, you drive your car, you come and go as you please, you make your own meals. It's independent senior living. Then you have what they call assisted living, which is usually paid for at a higher rate per level. You go level 1, level 2, level 3, where it goes everything from where we manage your medications to we give you personal care, or we escort you to the dining room, or we bring trays to your room. And then there's the third level of care, which is nursing home care. Very few of you will end up in nursing home care. Nursing home care used to be long-term care, where everybody would go for the end of their life. Nursing homes are now called rehab centers, wellness centers. What they have done is they've changed the language of the nursing homes because they've changed their marketing techniques. They are now looking at the first 20 days of Medicare as paying most of your bill. So once you've used up your first 20 days, they're looking for a way for you to get out of there and go back home. You might get it to 30 days, but basically, as long as that Part A Medicare is paying for it, they're going to keep you there under rehab. I just got a call on my way here. I have a couple who have been living together. They make $3,500 a month together. They live in affordable housing. They both are severely debilitated, and the daughter was calling, and she said, "What nursing home can we put them in?" And I said, "You can't. There is no nursing home anymore like there was in the old days. These are rehab centers. They're not going to say, 'We'd love to have you come and live with us.' They are no longer long-term care centers. Long-term care is now what we call assisted living and boarding care homes. And so the boarding care homes are the 6-bed and the 8 beds. They're the smaller homes that somebody has come in and they put 2 in a room, and they charge between $2,500 and $7,000 a month, and so do the assisted livings. How many of you can't wait to go live in a boarding care home? Or assisted living? Or how many of you said, let's all buy a house, hire our own caregiver, and just live together? What other options are there? The boarding care industry is really an interesting industry because it is pretty much unsupervised. There's a lot of laws in place, but there is no bite in the laws. Licensing is only required to go out once every 5 years. And that's if there's no complaints. If there's a complaint, you go out. But there's an ombudsman program here in Marin County. And in Marin, and as in every county, an ombudsman is required to come out once a month. Well, what's a person who's being mistreated going to say to somebody they see once a month if they remember who that person is? They're going to say everything's fine. Because if I'm dependent on you for my care, I'm sure not going to tell somebody else that you're not caring for me right. So what we find is that it's very difficult, unless there's constant monitoring and of quality and of standards, to really determine what kind of care people are getting in these places. I'm going to tell you a little bit about a new thing that's come up. It's called placement agencies. Any of you heard of a placement agency? Okay. A placement agency sits to the right of the discharge planner in the hospital or the nursing home waiting for referrals. What the placement agency does is they have signed contracts with certain boarding cares and certain assisted living saying, I'm going to bring you business and you're going to give me 75% of the first month's rent. Okay? So you ever hear of a Place for Mom? A Place for Mom is an internet placement agency. A Place for Mom has contracts with everybody around here. So you call and you say to a Place for Mom, I'm looking for a house, a place to live for my mom. A Place for Mom will send out an email to everybody in Marin, Sonoma, Napa, and San Francisco County, and you're a lead. If you go to any of those places where they've gotten an email to, they earn $1,500. That's called placement. Place for Mom does not visit the places. It doesn't go through the ombudsman information. It doesn't even know the people it's referring to. That is placement. There's legislation which has just been introduced under Assemblyman Mendoza to try to put some licensing on this, because the placement agency business, anybody can open up a placement agency. And they do. Back in 2011, we saw a huge number of people coming into this business, because remember, the real estate market crashed and the banking business crashed. So where are all those business people going to go? There's gold, and then they're old. They're coming here. Right? Okay.
Assuming the nursing homes, et cetera, are all expensive, how much for someone to come into your home and, I don't know, make sure you're eating? I mean, $12,000 for a nursing home, one.
Okay.
And where would you get such, is your hospital, would you have somebody happen a stroke and set up something through? I mean, Marin Village, how are they going to just?
Okay, so let's back up a minute here. If you want someone to come into your home, what you want is a private caregiver. You can get a private caregiver through 1,000 different ways. Your best friend can have a daughter, somebody at the church can be working, your doctor's nurse can come out. There are huge networks of people working as caregivers. And then there's private home care agencies. There are franchises like Home Instead, Homewell, Visiting Angels. I mean, you know the name. Those are all franchises. Those are all businesses. And many of the caregivers who work for one caregiving agency will work for another as well. So the quality of the care is determined only by the person that comes to visit your home. You may like this person and you may not like that person. Okay? There is no licensing necessary to be a caregiver in Marin County. There is in Napa County. We have a caregiver required license. The state has just changed the law, so next year they're going to require all caregivers to have a license before they can operate. Now, here's the deal with the caregivers. They can charge anything they want, just like you can pay anything you want. But we see the ranges of between $17 and $30 an hour. So there's a range between 17. And some people say minimum of 2 hours. Some people say minimum of 4 hours. I will say this. Marin County, you guys are flush. You have 100 home care agencies operating in this community. You guys, now I wonder why. Huh? You know why? You got the money. You got the money to pay for the care. And you know where your caregivers come from? Vallejo, Richmond, Sacramento. They'll come from anywhere, and they want 24-hour jobs, because on a 24-hour job, they can make between $375 and $450.
But there's also in-home supportive services.
Correct.
If you're on Medicaid.
Correct.
Or Medi-Cal.
If you're on Medi-Cal.
Which some people here might be. Yeah.
Anybody here on Medi-Cal? So I'll talk, well, what I'm saying is, being on Medi-Cal, and some people say, how do I get on Medi-Cal? And I go, you have to be really low income. You have to be on SSI, and that's your primary source of money, which is, what, $800 and some a month. And on Medi-Cal, you get certified by the county for a certain number of hours of in-home chore worker support. And the county pays that person, is it $12 an hour here? Something around there, $11, $12 an hour. And you can be certified up to 20 hours a week. But that's it. You don't get any more than that. And the chore worker services are very clearly defined. So they're preparing you a meal, they're doing grocery shopping, they're cleaning, but they're not doing your medications, they're not doing anything that would be more medically oriented. Okay? And the other thing with the chore workers is, and I don't know if this is a problem here, but you can hire a family member to be your caregiver, and you can pay the family member under in-home support services. You can pay a friend. But in what I'm hearing a lot about the caregivers and stuff is that the caregivers, and this is something I've been talking a lot to, because we have a huge low-income housing area in Napa called Rolfs Manor. A lot of people from Marin have been moved there. So when I talk to people, I go, where are you from? They go, Fairfax. They tell me they're from Marin, and I say, well, why? Because there's no affordable housing here. So they're moving them to Napa. They're taking them out of their friends and their neighbors and their lifelong relationships, and they're putting them someplace where they don't know anybody, they don't know how to use the transportation, they don't have any friends, and then they get in-home support services, and they get angry, and so they fire the workers over and over again. So there's a lot of that going on. A lot of workers are being fired, or there's a lot of tumult around this whole caregiver thing. The other thing about the caregivers are the people say to me, I want a trained caregiver. The caregivers don't undergo any kind of special training to become a caregiver. I can become a caregiver, you can go become a caregiver. Agencies will hire people off the street because you see there's a huge shortage of them. There's not enough people. So we have a lot of migrants coming in. In one situation, I'm not sure whether people coming from some of these countries know about refrigeration. I had someone leave a custard pie out for 3 days and feed it to somebody, not knowing that custard needs to be refrigerated. Not part of the cultural values. So he got very, very sick. So you have to keep an eye on who you're hiring and how much they actually know. Okay. Other questions?
You said you live in Napa?
I do.
And so I noticed when I went to the senior fair last year, they have a lot of fiduciaries in Napa.
They do everywhere. Fiduciary is a new field that only started about 5 or 6 years ago. And what it is they're licensed by the state of California, and they are people who come in and can take over your finances and manage your money. So people will often have a conservatorship with a fiduciary who will be managing their monies, and then someone else will be managing their care. That's what a case manager does. Someone says, well, what does a care manager do? A care manager charges anywhere between $100 and $165 an hour to manage your care. And the fiduciary charges that much as well as taking a percentage of the estate at time of death. Okay. Money, I told you. Go ahead.
Are you going to address, you were talking about affordable housing, the options of shared housing like Leslie Clore puts together, and the options of the lily pad homes where you have one of your bedrooms converted to a place where a caretaker could live or where you could live and the caretaker?
I'll address that in a minute. Okay.
Well, I just wanted to make that clear to me. My father passed away a few years ago at 96, and my mother had died a few years before. And he was in Rafael convalescent, which we thought was very good, for about 3 years before he passed away. But his mind was fine, and he really wasn't very ill. He did get pneumonia a few times, but so they're not allowing that anymore, you say, because he wasn't ill, but he was in a rest home.
Is that a nursing home, a skilled
nursing
nursing?
home.
Okay.
Nursing
They
home.
will allow it once they're in, but they don't like to bring them in. That's what I'm saying. If I go into a nursing home and I'm on Medi-Cal, or I get on Medi-Cal while I'm in nursing, they can't kick me out.
He was on Medi-Cal
Yeah.
when he
Yeah,
went.
they cannot kick you out. It's against the law.
Long-term care insurance.
Oh, my favorite.
I want to hear what you have to say.
Oh, well, let me put it this way. Every long-term care insurance agent that I knew 15 years ago was no longer in the business.
No.
Every long-term care insurance agent that I knew 15 years ago is no longer in the business. I'm giving you a very big piece of information here. I have to qualify people for the plans that they bought 10, 15 years ago. When I started Born to Age, I had every long-term care insurance agent arguing with me publicly at all these meetings, wanting to put advertising but not wanting to because I was such an advocate against long-term care insurance. At that time, the average age of someone using long-term care insurance is 82. At that time, only 6% of people ever used their policy. In order to qualify for a long-term care insurance policy, you have to be unable to do 2 activities of daily living, which is you cannot feed yourself, you cannot walk, you cannot transfer, you cannot toilet. What kind of shape are you in? Pretty bad shape. There's also that 100-day elimination period. So you need long-term care insurance, and you have to wait 100 days where you have to pay for your home care out of your own pocket while you're waiting for the long-term care insurance to come in. I just went up to a woman's home who is 91 years old. Her husband is 95 years old, and she pulled out her policy, and she goes, look how smart we were. We bought CNA long-term care insurance in 1986, and I went through to see how long have they been paying for it and what have they paid in. And they have been paying $537 every 6 months since 1986. How much is that? Who's smart? A lot of money. They have a capped rate of what they can use, $14,570. Max cap rate. 2 hours a day at $25 an hour, $50 a day for 730 days. That's all they have. And when I told her this, she started crying. Because if they would have put that money into a savings account and saved it, they would have had over $40,000. So she said to me, why do we buy this? And I said, I don't know. Because long-term care insurance agents told you this was a good thing. She doesn't have the $1,500 a month to pay for the elimination period. She's living on $2,000 a month. So she said, how can I even do the elimination period to qualify for the insurance? So her children are all pitching in so she can qualify for the insurance for 100 days. That's 3 months. So what do you think I think about long-term care insurance?
Wasted money.
What I'm saying is it would be better to put that money aside into an account and just put aside because you're not going to use it all. You can be drawing interest on it, and that'll be your fund. That'll be your long-term care plan. But I'm going to say that out of all, here's another one. Some people, back, people bought nursing home policies. The nursing home policy covers the same thing as covered by Medicare. So the nursing home policy pays for the first 20 days, which is what Medicare pays. I go, you're duplicating the same payment, which this CNA long-term care insurance told me this last week will pay for her home health care benefit. She doesn't need that. Home health care is 100% Medicare paid. So you see, you have to really pay attention to the benefits, what the language of it is, and how much you're actually going to pay in. Okay?
So I have a neighbor who has had the in-home service. Is that what it's called? But she fell and broke some parts of her body. And as soon as that happens and she's in the hospital, she has no coverage. Yet she still needs many things taken care of. Is there anything that's like the bridge until she gets home?
What do you mean she needs things taken care of in the hospital?
No, things needed to be taken care of as far as, deliveries that were, like business, and no one else around.
That's what your village is for.
No, but they can't deal with money, and they don't deal with,
Okay, so what happens is someone goes into the nursing home, and they live alone, and they're in the nursing home for 3 months. What happens? Their mail doesn't get picked up, their cable gets cut off, all the food in the refrigerator gets spoiled, right? And then they're discharged home, and they're in shock.
Yes.
And so what do? You volunteer. In Napa County, we developed a program called Golden Bridges. So everybody who goes home under these circumstances gets visited by a volunteer to make sure that their in-home support caregiver service worker who has quit because it's been 3 months and has gone on to another person, they get a new one in to make sure that they have enough diapers and underpads and everything for the bed to make sure. So we have a volunteer that goes in. I will tell you that I have gone in myself because we have a program called Share the Care, which is similar to the Village program, and I have found people who were sent home and sat there for 3 days because they didn't know what to do. They didn't know that their medication was still sitting in the bag because no one came to put it out, and the home health order, the doctor never sent to the home health agency. So things get dropped all the time. It's not unusual. So you need your volunteers, you need your friends, you need your support group, you need to rely on each other because the truth is there's nobody out there. There isn't. Everyone says, well, who's liable? I got a call Memorial Day weekend of last year, and the neighbor had come over and she found her friend sitting in a diaper, and she said, somebody's got to do something. because she was afraid to change her friend's diaper, and she didn't know what to do. So she called me up, and I drove to Calistoga, and I found a woman who had been sitting in a diaper for over 14 hours. Her entire bed, everything was soiled. She was totally demented. And I said, what is going on here? And I started going through the house because no one has the right information. She had no forms. I found cards of social workers. I found scraps of paper. After 2.5 days, here's the picture that I put together. That morning, the fire department was there because she had fallen, and she refused to go to the hospital, which very often happens. If you refuse to go to the hospital, the fire department picks you up, puts you back to bed, where she laid for the next 14 hours in a delirium, not having a clue where she was. The home-delivered meals guy came, dropped off her food, said, how you doing? She says, good, and left. So she had 2 people there that day, including her neighbor. So I'm saying that even with people have to have eyes and ears and know what to be looking for. I ended up hiring a caregiver to come in for 48 hours straight, and I didn't even know if she had the money to pay for it. And I had a neighbor break into her, I'm saying this out loud, break into her mailbox, because we had to find a bank statement. We had to find out where she banked. We had to find out whether she had enough money. And this was an open and viable APS case. Open and viable APS case. Adult Protective Services. She had a social worker. But it was a Memorial Day weekend, and they don't work for 3 days. Okay? Kind of like being a doctor. Okay, so I'm going to touch on the shared housing, and I'm going to tell you that what you said is very valid. People relying on each other. How many of you have heard of the shared housing program where people will take somebody in and you can either work off dollars or service? They have a program here in Marin County, and they have one in Sonoma County. There's also cooperative housing, older adult cooperative housing, co-ops that they're building up. There's a New York Times did a big feature on a man I know who lives in Davis. They bought the entire circle of homes, and they all moved in, and they're hiring their caregivers, and they're saying, we're going to take care of each other, and we're not going to rely on the corporations. We're not going to rely on people we don't know. We're not going to rely on people who don't care about us. I don't know how you feel about having strangers coming in to take care of you. I'm very nervous about that because I don't believe that they really would. I would have a trust issue. Would this person know that I'm extremely claustrophobic and I need to be by a window? Or would this person know that I have to see nature and I have to look at trees? My dad was at the Mayo Clinic in Scottsdale, and they put him in a room with no windows. And I said, this is ridiculous. My dad's the kind of man that he has to look out a window. So I asked for another room. Would another caregiver have known that? Those are the kinds of things that we want people to know about us. So when you write your plan, write those kinds of things. Right? It's important for me to have music. I want to have candles in the room. Bring in fresh flowers. Make sure my dog is with me or my cat. I want to see all my children. When my uncle died, he wanted everything. It was like a 2-week party. He wanted everybody there all the time talking about everything in front of him relentlessly. His car mechanic was there. Everybody they knew in Ashland was there. I mean, it was just constant partying. And we didn't have a memorial service because his memorial service was as he was dying. That was his memorial service. That he got what he wanted. He got exactly what he wanted. Right before he died, he jumped in a car and went for a ride in a convertible. That's what he wanted. He also wanted a good beer the day he died. So there's different kinds of housings, but we have to create that. Because the truth is, Brookdale is the largest housing provider now in the entire country, and it's the biggest corporation, which just took over Emeritus, and everybody here knows why it took over Emeritus, don't you? Because PBS Frontline did that story about Emeritus saying how subpar the care was. And they had to clean up their name, so they sold the whole caboodle to Brookdale, which is now a huge mega conglomerate owned by investors. And Emeritus already had a bad reputation for cutting back on food and care. What do you think Brookdale's going to have? Huh? Okay. Next, what else do you want to know about?
So, Steve used the
Let's talk about drugs. My favorite subject. Let's talk about drugs. Drugs is a really, really iffy issue with older people because the very drug that might cure your pain may make you dizzy and fall down and cause you more harm. So we have started a campaign against what we call psychoactive medications. The California Association of Nursing Home Reform has come out against a lot of the drugs that you see being given to people who have dementia. Those drugs are Seroquel, Risperidol, Depakote, Ativan, let's go down the list, Valium, Xanax, what else? Halidol, did I say Halidol? All the drugs you see treated for people who have mental illness are now being given to people who have dementia because it calms them down. You know when you see them drooling and like this? They're drugged. They are drugged. That is not a normal part of the disease process. So the California Association of Nursing Home Reform just did a big conference on psychoactive medications, and they said, no one needs them. Why are we giving them? If you go to places like Aegis, Sunrise, one of the top things they're doing is dispensing these medications. They don't want agitation. They don't want people wandering around at night, so they're drugging them. Statistically, 1 out of every 5 people who are going to be given these drugs is going to die an earlier death. Okay. If you had this kind of behavior with children, what would you do? Would you drug them? No. You don't drug children for behaving this way. Why are we drugging older people? What happened is the language of dementia, the language of Alzheimer's is still a language that we don't take the time to understand. If someone is agitated, it's for a reason. Find out what the reason is. Sometimes it's because they're in pain. They lose the ability to have the words to say it. There's a lot being done in this area right now, and I will say quite unequivocally that very few are listening to this message. Very, very few. We had one of the top doctors from the Medical Society come out and talk to us about psychoactive medications, and he believes that absolutely nobody should be taking them who has dementia, that this is not a treatment. The FDA has a black box warning on it, and yet we continue seeing it being utilized. I had a person who was given Depakote. Her husband and her had been living together. Her husband had surgery. His son convinced him to put her in an assisted living facility. She was very upset, so she started hitting her head on the wall because she could no longer speak. So they gave her medication. She became increasingly agitated. They moved her to another facility, put her on Depakote, and she died within 2 days. The husband said, well, I guess she was ready to go. And I'm questioning whether or not the medication utilization is what made it go faster. Yeah.
I've dealt with some people with Alzheimer's and they've been extremely agitated without medication. So, you know, I wonder what you can do for someone who's extremely agitated and keeps thinking they have to be somewhere and they have to do something and they have to, you know, if you don't, they don't understand when you say, no, you really don't have to be somewhere, you're really okay, or, you know, they don't get it. So they are in a lot of anxiety.
Right. So what you're not seeing is there's classes on this now on how to understand the behaviors, because I can't do it just in 2 minutes here. But there are classes on this now. There are trainings. What happens is if every time I keep getting up like this, and the nurse says, sit down, and I keep getting up, what am I doing? I'm bothering her. She wants me to sit down, but I have to go to the bathroom. Do you know what I'm saying? And I'm saying that a lot of the agitation, a lot of the problems, there are classes and trainings to learn how to read them. And what's happened is people misunderstand the language of Alzheimer's. I mean, that's the truth. I mean, when we talk about it, there's a place in Arizona called the Beatitudes, and they have taken the most difficult, the most agitated, anxiety-ridden patients, the ones that have been kicked out of 6 other facilities, and they take them off the meds. So there is a language to be understood.
These people weren't on meds.
That's what I'm saying. They took them off the meds.
But what I'm saying is they still are extremely agitated. And I don't think it's because they have to go to the bathroom. But that's
Okay.
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 A lot of times the people that are agitated like that are fall risk.
Well, all kind of risk, but what I'm saying also is that drugging them isn't the answer. It's not.
And so much of the agitation, 'cause my mother had Alzheimer's, and it's that she didn't understand what her capabilities were anymore. So she'd want a cup of tea and she'd put a cup of water on the fire instead of warming the water. And then when it didn't work, she was mad at me because she thought I did something to the stove. You know, so it's to understand really what was going on. But I want to say one more thing. It's a question like, because I was living in with several different elders, all in their 90s. And they say now that Alzheimer's, they start calling it diabetes 3. Because so much of it is connected with diet. You can really do a lot. And so I did with this one woman. And she got off of her diabetic 2 medication. You know, she got better. But her kids, who went in the home, like you said, the money, got mad at me and they dismissed me because I was getting her health taken care of.
There are so many theories. There's so many things going on around, and more brain books, the illumination games. I have gone to probably 100 Alzheimer's talks, and every time I go, I think, oh, I got to do this differently. Oh, I got to do that. I got to walk more. I got to eat this. I can't stop thinking, oh, I can't use this. There's so many different theories, and there's now saying there's 80 different causes of dementia. 80 different. Now, you know, my mom was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, but I don't believe my mother has Alzheimer's. My mother was on Xanax for 40 years for anxiety. That was how they treated anxiety. And she had a severe anxiety disorder from the war, and so she popped Xanax for 40 years. Well, now they've come out that 50% of the people who use Xanax have dementia. I suspect my mom has a Xanax-caused dementia. Of course, I can't prove it, but that's what I suspect. They're also saying that long-term depression causes dementia. They're saying that I've heard the diabetes 3 theory as well. I have heard every theory. I have heard that if you walked 6 miles a day or 10 miles a week or whatever, you can prevent it. I'm a man from Berkeley, just wrote a new book. He's being featured on the Today Show. He called me up as I was coming here, and he said, Yvonne, I want you to interview me on my new book on how to prevent it. I go, I need to prevent it. Because I think that's all of us are concerned about what happens when we lose our mind. And I think that now they've proven that those games are useless. You know, they're saying those games, well, you learn the game, but that's not what's going to prevent you from getting the disease. Yeah. So, any more questions on this part of the planning? Because then we'll move on to the end of life.
I've been taking a antidepressant for some time because I had some deaths in my family and near and dear to me. So I'm wondering if it's been too long.
Okay, so I'm gonna hit on the topic of antidepressants and depression for a minute. Most of the people, I would say most of the people I go visit at home are having some sort of depression. What happens is the serotonin levels in our bodies naturally start dropping, and if we're socially isolated and not exercising and spending a lot of time by ourselves ruminating on things, pretty soon we can get pretty depressed. And I see a lot of depression, and I see a lot of people on antidepressants. And I always wonder, what did people do before? I think forming community, having conversations, and getting out of social isolation are probably the strongest things in getting those serotonin levels up with physical activity. But I will say that there's really bad depression. I saw a woman a couple of weeks ago who's actually a friend of mine, and she's 73, and she had that hollowness of depression where nothing can come in, severe, that hollow depression. And I've seen that. That's an extreme. But most of the people I'm on are just sad. They're just sad. Life is different than what they thought it was going to be like. And getting older is a lot different than what they thought it was going to be like. I'll touch on medical marijuana for anybody interested in me talking about that for 1 minute. You get a 1 minute medical marijuana talk. It works. Is that what you need to hear? Okay, it works. It works, and believe me, I do not use medical marijuana, and I was pretty shocked to see it work. And it works on cancer patients for pain, and it works in pain for people who have been on Oxy. I had an 89-year-old woman on Oxy who was totally bedbound for a year. She started taking a little bit of a gummy bear. Within a week, she was walking and giggling and giving it to her husband, who was a grouch. So it works. For some people, it works. And I say, you know, that's wonderful. I just have a woman who, she's in stage 4 cancer. She asked me if I would help her get her some. I told her she needed a doctor's letter. She got the letter from her doctor, who was a Kaiser doctor, who gave her a letter of recommendation. She took the letter. We made copies of it, emailed it down to Harborside. Harborside delivers. She had never had to leave, and she ordered it online, and they delivered. She took it, and the neuropathy in her feet went down so much that she could walk. She had not been able to walk. She could just feel tingling now, but the neuropathy was totally gone from the chemo. So it works. Try it. I have no idea. It's worth a try. And you know, arthritis. And what I'm saying is there are creams that comes in creams and tinctures and comes in all kinds of stuff now. So I was at an older adult fair in Hayward, and there was a medical marijuana. There were 2 women with a pump of medical marijuana cream, and the line was 80 people long. I mean, it never stopped. They were pumping that cream the whole time. Everybody was smearing it on them. So I don't know. It was called, but I'm saying it works. I've seen it work. Primrose, which is an assisted living in Sonoma County, uses it with their Alzheimer's patients. They use it for the agitation. They give them a little bit of brownie at night. They've taken them off all the meds, and they're under psychiatric care, and they're doing just fine. And these are patients that had been kicked out of all the other facilities. So it works.
Just to add to that, a good friend of mine was very incapacitated with severe back. She was afraid to have back surgery, but she had a lot of pain. So she started to take, and then, you know, like what you were talking about, and then I didn't see the marijuana I'm talking about, and I didn't see her for a few months, et cetera. When I saw her again, I went, whoa. I mean, you know, she was walking straight, red, I mean, just, didn't make her a youngster anymore, but you know, and just in listening to you, the last hour and a half, that was the first positive thing. I didn't mean it whatever way, that is not what I meant. I know you need to get our attention, and you've done a great job with that. But I'm just saying, you know, like, is there anything? You know, and it's one thing, and I have to feel slightly guilty, or I won't. But I mean, the powers that be, still, you know, you still have to kind of go around the corner and basically deal with San Francisco, because, you know, and I resent that. You know, that isn't my choice, if I want to.
You do have, in Marin, you do have services that will deliver to your door.
I'm sorry.
You do have services that will deliver to your door in Marin. There's a woman who walks around the Marin Fair with a little card and then she has a tour of all the dispensaries that she'll give you. What happens is you can go on to weedmaps.com, and you can find all the dispensaries in the Bay Area and all of the delivery services on weedmaps.com.
Sounds like we have the topic for the next talk.
I will say this. The very first time I got called in to bring marijuana into somebody, it was a man who was dying of cirrhosis. He had 6 days left of life, and I had never, ever done this. And so I went to the hospice nurse, and I asked for permission, and she said, we don't approve of that. And I said, oh, God. So I drove to Vallejo. I had to put on my tie-dye shirt and my, oh, my God, and I have adult children who I raised in a no-drug household, so I had to, totally go against everything I believed in, and I got down to Vallejo, and there were 2 pit bulls guarding the dispensary, and I walked in, and I had to talk to a 18-year-old about medication, and he was like, yeah, man, this is cool. We'll throw this in. And I had this bag of pot that I had to drive from Vallejo back to Napa, and my car reeked of pot. And I was thinking, oh, God, please don't have anyone pull me over for any reason, because I'm going to have a hell of a time explaining this. And I went in and I gave it to he was in a residential care home, a boarding care home, and they took it and they said, no problem. And that was it. And he died 2 days later. I don't even know if he used it. I bet you they did. Yeah.
The problem is with the marijuana, which a lot of us know is good, is not covered, by any insurance. You have to pay for that.
Right.
It's expensive. I have a friend that's almost 100 that had hospice care and some other care and stuff, and they just drugged her up with morphine where she was passing out, and the firemen would come and she would go to the hospital, and they, like you said, put her back to bed and drive off, and finally got her off of all that morphine, and she's doing better. But it would be wonderful if she could have marijuana, but she didn't have any money for it. So what do we do when we got this miracle drug that people can't?
You can go tell the dispensaries that you don't have any money for it. The dispensaries are nonprofits, and they will help. They will help. Ask for free samples, but they do help. They do help. I'm going to move on because we're running a little short on time, and I'm covering a lot. And so if you need to redirect me, you can redirect me. So now I'm going to talk about end of life. We talked a little bit about planning. We talked a little bit about preparing. Now we're going to talk about the end of life, something that none of us talk about, right? Right. I once had a boyfriend, and I once had a boyfriend. And he said, "You're so negative." And he said, "You're preoccupied with this whole end of life thing." And I said, "Well, actually, the closer I get to talking about end of life, the more I learn about how I want to live and what is important in my life." And have any of you heard of the Death Cafe movement or the after? Okay, so they have a Death Cafe. Do they have one in Marin?
Yes.
Okay. Have you gone?
Yes.
What was it like for you?
It was different to what I imagined it was going to be, in so much as it was meeting in groups and talking about death. And there were young people there. It wasn't just seniors discussing it. And the discussions really were about how your sister died or how your parents died and all that sort of thing. It was like that. But there was one man there that had had surgery for brain tumor, and he was more likely to talk about end of life issues than the rest of them.
Okay. So I'm in a group called The Last Year of Life, and it's based on the Stephen Levine book. And every month we get together and we cover a different chapter and we discuss the aspects of the chapter. And doesn't it sound pretty gruesome to be going every month to a group where we talk about the end of our life? But actually what we're really talking about is what is important to us. We are bonding, we're forming a community, and we are realizing what part of our life is yet unlived. It is like, what's our beliefs? What are our values? Have we lived true to what we were here for? It is being done very gently. We had to pick a death date. All of us had to pick a death date. My death date is October 20th of this year. So we all had to do that, and we had to go through that period of, oh, jinx, oh, my God, what if we create this? Oh, we got really nervous. So we have somebody who has a July date, and then we went all the way back to, I think, November. So all of a sudden, if you hear of 13 people who die rather... So we had to do things like write our obituary. We had to do things like plan what we want to have done with us at the end of life. We had to sit around and talk about who we love, why we love, or what has meant the most to us. We had to be conscious of how much time we have left on Earth and what we actually want to have happen while we're here. Because I'm looking around this room, and I'm saying, it's probably a conversation that all of us haven't had with anybody else in a long time. It's a thought that goes through my head. But what thought goes through everybody's head is, well, how much time do you think you got left? It's like my neighbor when he got into his motorcycle accident. He says, I realized at that moment that I didn't have as much time as I thought I did. And we all think we have a lot of time. My parents, honestly, my dad thinks at the age of 88, after his third cancer was diagnosed this year, that he has another 50 years. He's going to be the first one to make it this long. Thank God for the Mayo Clinic. So thinking about death really, really encapsulates for all of us what our life is about. I went to a death cafe in Petaluma, and again, it was people of all ages, of all experiences, and basically what we talked about was our fear, our tremendous fear of not only of death, but what happens after death, because, some of us who've been raised the way I've been raised, that's where I'm going to really suffer is afterwards. So in planning for our death, it's kind of like, how do you want your death to be? What do you want it to be like? Do you want those flowers there? Do you want the animals with you? My aunt was a ICU nurse for Alta Bates Hospital, and she worked in the burn unit. And so she worked with people who lived in tremendous suffering. And at the age of 50, she was diagnosed with terminal colon cancer. And she died here in Marin County, and her death was not at all what she had thought it would be like, because she thought she would die when she was 90, and she thought that she would have a different life. And as she was dying, she refused to talk about it. We didn't know. We didn't know whether she wanted to be cremated. We didn't know what. Hospice came in, and she was already in the morphine coma, and there was nothing we could do. I had no idea where her family was. I mean, it was just a mess. And as I was running around, and I was there, my uncle was with her, and he was totally out of it. He was in that horrible grief place where all he was doing was walking into walls. And so even with hospice there, I couldn't get a sense of what she wanted. So when she died, I had her cremated. And then I got a call from her family in New York. She was Russian Orthodox. Boy, did I get in trouble. They said, you hippies there in Marin County, you just built a bonfire and threw her body on it. So they weren't at their best, but neither was any of us, because we didn't know what to do. We had no plan. And my uncle had no idea that Russian Orthodox faith prohibited cremation. So there was a lot of grief. There was a lot of untold stuff with family at the end. And I'm just saying that it can really help to have these things down. I often have people say to me, well, I know what I want. I have my burial plan. I have my burial insurance. I know what I want. I go, that's great. But how do you want to live the last part of your life until you die? Because that's the part that your kids and your family is going to want to know about. So in developing a plan, I had to write my own obituary. So I was writing my own obituary. You ever read the obituary? Of course, everybody reads the obituaries. So, New York Times has an obituary writer who's absolutely magnificent. I love his obituaries. And he wrote an obituary about the king and queen of some country in Eastern Europe that was my favorite. I cut it out. And the thing about obituaries is that's your last statement on this planet. And so what do you want it to say? What was important to you? What do you want people to remember you by? My mother wrote her obituary years and years ago, and she told us she wanted this processional funeral with all of the students that she's ever taught in Dearborn, Michigan, and she wanted a huge crypt thing with. And, it's not going to happen, because one of the things my mom didn't put into perspective was when she's 83 years old, most of her students aren't going to be around anyway, and we move them to another part of the country. So what's important to you? Write out your plan. In the back of my directory, you'll see the prices of the cremations and the direct burials in Marin County and also in Sonoma County. So I had one woman in one of the independent living apartments refuse to allow my directory in the apartments because she said, you're morbid. You put that in. The reason I put that in is when I started the North Coast Gray Panthers, Maggie Kuhn was still alive. Does anybody here remember Maggie Kuhn? She was the Berkeley Gray Panthers lady. And she came up to Humboldt County, and she was helping me do this. And one of the things that we became really aware of is that without oversight, without someone watching, people do whatever they want. And that includes our funeral industry, that includes our pharmaceutical industry, that includes our boarding care homes, that includes everybody who's responsible in some way of taking care of us. And what we started doing was we started comparing the prices of exactly the same service, and we started publishing them. This was up in Humboldt. And I started doing that with drugs, hearing aids, what else? Home care. I did it with a whole bunch of things, and I became like the enemy of everybody up there. So then I moved to Napa. And I started doing it in Napa. And the pharmaceutical industry, the drugstores, got really mad at me. I mean, they got really, really mad at me, and they refused to give me their drug prices because they told me it didn't matter. It was all covered by insurance anyway. And I'd say, well, it does matter. And I discovered that Long's Drugs, if you remember Long's before it was CVS, had 3 drugstores in Napa, all within 3 miles, and each drugstore charged different prices for the same drugs. Well, how would I not have known that unless I did a comparison chart? So I started comparing drug prices, and then I started doing the mortuary prices. We used to have a society called the Redwood Memorial Society, which compared all the drug prices, and people would join it in order to get low-cost cremations. And they went out of business, and there was another one up in Alameda. There is nobody in California now comparing drug prices, mortuary prices, except for me. And so I'm still doing it because when I started doing it, the prices were higher. The prices have actually come down now that people are paying attention to what the prices are. So it does make an impact to know where you're shopping and what you're shopping for. I will say that Daphne's Funeral Service is here, won't cooperate at all. She won't even give me your prices, which is against the law. When you go in, they have to give you their prices. They have to give you a general price list. And they cannot say you can only come in when you need service. They can't do that. But that's what Daphne's did. She refused to allow me information about her service. And I reported it to the consumer board, but there's nobody in Sacramento. There's nobody up there watching any of this anyway. So I kind of am going to wrap it up now because I've talked for a long time. I see everyone's getting a little restless and you all need a little more wine. But if you have any questions, I'll be happy to. Okay, you haven't asked one.
Thank you. I have gone to Keegan's funeral home in San Rafael because they're close to where I live. And I asked them, I said, I want my dogs who have been cremated, and they're on my mantelpiece to go with me. And I have my plot in Tennessee, I'm going to Tennessee, and have a plot in stone already in place, except the DOA is not chiseled in, just the DOB. And so he said they would be happy to ship the dog with me to Tennessee, to the funeral home I've designated. And they had funeral home in Tennessee and said they will allow the dogs to be buried with me. And I want one under the left arm, one under the right arm. And my cousin said, those people in Tennessee are crazy. You better not tell them there's dogs in their cemetery. And I said, the funeral guy doesn't care. And the box is going to be closed, and it's going to be just a box. And but he told me that they would come and pick me up, and they would make sure that I would make sure that somebody is there to hand them the dogs, the box of dogs, the ashes. And he says that's the only way we can do it. We've got to have somebody standing there that they have a note in their hand. So anybody that's thinking about this and wants their dogs or their cats or their horse or anybody to go with them, they need to have that in writing for a person to be standing there to hand it to the funeral people who will put it in the box along with you.
Sounds very Egyptian. How very Egyptian of you.
So my aunt donated her body for study at UC
SF.
SF.
Mhm.
What do you have to do if that's what you want to do and you don't want to go through this whole burial?
You call them up and tell them. They take everybody's body. I was really surprised. I just had a woman who died. She was 96 years old. I thought there's no way they're going to take her body. They did.
I was going to say that's an option to save my children money and my money, because I donated my body to UCSF, and wherever I'm dead, if I'm hit by a car or something, they come get you for free, take you over there, they keep you
Yeah, but they don't differentiate. What happens is they won't be your ashes. It'll be like a mass. Yeah.
What I was going to say to you, I say this to friends all the time, and they hate it. I say, what are you going to do? What are you doing tomorrow? So you say what you're doing tomorrow, and I say, you don't know. It's out of your hands.
Okay.
I heard that if you donate your organs, if you're injured, badly injured, that some people will harvest your organs before you die, or they'll accelerate your death. To get it
Some people in China. In China, they do this in China.
I understand. So I took that out of my will, that I'm not going to donate my organs.
No, what happens is this. Let's talk about this. There is death, which is brain death, when people die, but they can keep your heart beating and your lungs going on a machine. But you are dead, but they can keep your heart and your lung going. It's brain death. That way they can go in and harvest because they have to have the fluid circulating through the organ to keep it alive. It starts destructing as soon as the body stops that. So that what people think is that when they're on a heart-lung machine that they're alive because they're breathing. That when the brain is dead, the brain is dead. And so that's where people get very confused. So they'll go in, they'll go, oh, this person's still alive. I saw her breathing, or her foot twitched, or she nodded or something, or she had a reflex. You will actually heal. If you have bruises on your body, they will actually heal on a heart and lung machine. We had a case up in Eureka where a 4-year-old was beaten, and she was brain dead, and she was put on machines, and the family fought her being taken off because she was healing on the machines, and so the family said, she's obviously still alive. She was on the machines for 6 months. When they took her off, of course, she was dead. But what was the man who beat her prosecuted for? Assault and battery, but not murder, right? Because, so that's the question. So if it looks like you're alive because you're on the machine, that's what you're thinking about. And they have to put you on the machine to keep that organ still in good shape, healthy.
I thoroughly agree with what you said, but there was a quote I heard recently. It said, without oversight, people do what they want.
That's true. That was me saying that. That's true, especially bad people. I will say to you that I've heard these stories mostly in other countries, that they do it in other countries and stuff. But I do know that people have to go on heart-lung machines in order to keep those organs viable before they can be taken, especially the eyes as well.
Do they really want organs from old folks like us?
Yeah. Yeah. Depends. They want your skin.
I have an interest in something that I think is a little obscure, but I've heard about a program where a natural area is being conserved because people are buried there. They're buried in, minimally prepared and in just boxes, and then you pay for that burial, and you're there, but it's just a natural area that has been conserved.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know whether there's anything like that.
It's here in Marin. You have it over there by Tennessee Valley Road. What's the name of it? Fernwood. You have a natural cemetery. The prices are pretty high, but you have a natural cemetery where you are buried in a shroud. You don't even need to have a casket. You also can do your funeral at home. You don't have to have a funeral home. You can do your funeral at home. Jerry Lyons in Sonoma teaches a death midwifery class where people actually are there to accompany people through the dying process. And then there's a whole film, PBS did a whole film on it. They get these pine caskets and they color them, and they make the grandkids make decorations on them, and they get everything ready for the person to go into. Now, when I lived in Humboldt County, Humboldt County is kind of an outlaw kind of place. We had a lot of home funerals in there. And that was pretty much what people did. So In fact, when I moved down here, one of the people in Alameda County, I was doing the funeral service, and he said, there is no way we allow home funerals in this state. And I said, oh, absolutely do. You absolutely can have you can stay on dry ice for 3 days and not have to worry about decomposing. So there's absolutely, and there are a number of women now who are trained they're called death midwives, where they help people go through the death, just like people were being helped going through the birth. In fact, a friend of mine went to Tibet and studied under some famous death midwife person in Tibet and came back to the Bay Area and works as a death midwife now. It's an interesting process. I'd probably go screaming and yelling the whole way, no, don't, I know it's on the other side, it's very dark. Any more questions?
Is there an attorney here somewhere in Marin County that doesn't charge an arm and leg to update your will?
Anybody have an attorney who doesn't charge an arm? You can ask.
Elizabeth, she spoke to us. I personally used her.
Elizabeth Warren. What's an arm and a leg? Tell me what an arm and a leg is. How much do they charge in Marin for?
Probably about $400 an hour.
Okay. What does J.R. Hastings charge downtown San Rafael? Yeah. So attorneys charge between $250 and $500 an hour. That's the prices that I'm seeing out here now. So, and there's also legal services that will help for people who are of lower legal aid. You have legal aid here. Okay.
If you're over 60, you can get a half hour with an attorney for free in Marin County, who can just sort of advise you generally and get you started on the process, which could help some people that are
Get that free with the stuff.
yeah, they won't write the will for you, but they can help give you orientation on the subject, on what you might want to do.
So my mother wrote her own will, but she never had it witnessed or signed. She never chose an executor. And what she always said to us was, I know the three of you will get along just fine and won't need me. That's what she said. And always love each other the way I've loved you. So my sister and I are flying back to Michigan on June 20th to get rid of everything in the house and put the house up on the market. And my brother's not even talking to us. So, because that's the way things happen in families. And no matter how much, whatever intentions my mom was, she didn't write down anything. She all thought that we would all be able to figure it out. So carrying that tradition to my own children, I have told them the same thing. Well, thank you so much for having me. I have plenty of copies of Born to Age. Take them, give them out to your friends. And
Thank you.